We begin our story in the late 13th century in a region known to Europeans as Anatolia, today modern-day Turkey. Here we find a collection of Turkish tribes who were mostly nomadic. They were divided into many small chieftains and were constantly fighting each other for dominance. But in 1299, one chieftain named Osman I would unite most of them together and establish an independent state. His dynasty would take their name from his title, which was the Ottoman Bey. And thus began the Ottoman Empire. Osman I wasn't a conqueror. He spent much of his reign just consolidating small victories around his capital of Bursa. It was his son, Orhan, who would push the Ottomans across Anatolia, conquering many Byzantine cities and expanding their domain all the way to the Sea of Marmara. It was Orhan who also founded the city of Edirne, which became the new Ottoman capital. And it was here that the third Ottoman Sultan, Murad I, would assemble a powerful army. With it, he pushed the Serbs south, entering the Balkans for the first time and laying siege to Constantinople. It was a failure. But 3 years later, Murad's successor, Bayezid I, would conquer the Bulgarian capital of Adrianople, opening the door for the Ottomans into the Balkans. In this famous painting by the French Orientalist Jean-Léon Gérôme, we see the Ottoman Sultan Bayezid I, also known as the Thunderbolt, riding into battle on a horse with a red blanket over its back. One of his enemies was captured in the painting and brought before him. That enemy is Timur the Lame, leader of the Turco-Mongol dynasty of the White Horde. And these two men were set to meet on the battlefield in what would become known as the Battle of Ankara in 1410. The battle started badly for Bayezid. Timur managed to surprise the Ottoman left flank and push them back. But then Bayezid rallied his elite troops, the Janissaries, and rode out to face Timur in single combat. There he broke his opponent's lance and took his standard. It seemed like the Ottomans would win until suddenly Timur's horde arrived on the scene. They overwhelmed the Ottomans and captured the Sultan. In this drawing, we see Bayezid in captivity, seated on the ground while Timur interrogates him. In the background are more of Bayezid's sons, Orhan, Musa and Ahmed, who had been taken captive. All three would die in prison. Only Mehmed, also known as Mehmed the Conqueror, would survive and return to liberate his father and rebuild the Ottoman Empire. And in 1421, when Bayezid was released from captivity, he marched on Ankara and executed those responsible for his imprisonment. Mehmed himself continued his father's campaign into the Balkans, conquering many more cities and defeating the Hungarians who had allied with Timur. By 1444, the Ottomans controlled most of the Balkans, and only Constantinople remained in the hands of the Byzantines. For 76 years, the Ottomans had laid siege to the city, trying to capture it, but they failed again and again. The city was well fortified, and the navy of the Republic of Venice protected the sea. Finally, in 1453, Mehmed the Conqueror, determined to finish what his ancestors started, ordered the construction of a massive cannon called the Big Bass. Painted by an unknown artist in 1857, this is an image of the capture of Constantinople. The walls of the city are breached and Ottoman soldiers ride their horses into the streets. On the right side, we see Sultan Mehmed riding his white horse into the Hagia Sophia, now converted into a mosque. The great church's dome is seen in the background. Before the fall of the city, this church had been the largest in the world, boasting the tallest dome ever built. Now the Ottomans have conquered the city. They have replaced the cross with a crescent moon and the Latin inscription on the facade has been chiseled away. After Constantinople fell, the Ottoman Empire quickly expanded across the rest of the Balkans and into the Caucasus. From there, they advanced into the Middle East, conquering Syria, Palestine and Egypt. During the reigns of the next few sultans, the empire grew rapidly, becoming a vast realm stretching from Hungary to Yemen. The war with the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt was a particularly important one because it established Ottoman control over the trade routes to India. This enabled the Ottomans to acquire immense wealth, which in turn helped them grow even larger. By 1529, the Ottomans were at the gates of Vienna, but the Austrians managed to hold them off. Still, the Habsburgs never stopped fearing an Ottoman invasion, and it was this fear that fueled their alliance with the Russians against the Turks. But the Russian Tsar was soon defeated by another Ottoman Sultan, Suleiman the Magnificent, at the Battle of Belgrade in 1526. The Habsburg King Ferdinand was forced to flee and the Ottomans occupied Hungary, keeping them out of the war in Italy. Suleiman is considered to be the greatest and most powerful ruler of the Ottoman Empire. He ruled over a vast territory that stretched from North Africa into Iran and southeastern Europe. Under his rule, the Ottomans fought against the Safavids, conquering Baghdad and Kurdistan, as well as pushing deeper into Eastern Europe. Suleiman was an accomplished military commander, but he was also a patron of the arts. Many great works of Ottoman literature were produced during his reign, as well as buildings such as the Blue Mosque and the magnificent Topkapi Palace. Built in the mid-1500s, the palace served as the main residence of the sultans for several hundred years. Within the courtyards of the palace stood beautiful gardens, fountains and pools, as well as a library containing hundreds of thousands of manuscripts and books. But no mosque or palace could compare to the beauty of the ships of the Ottoman Navy. Designed and built in the imperial dockyards of the empire, these vessels were a blend of Italian, Arab and Turkish design and were unmatched in size, power and maneuverability in the Mediterranean. Some of the ships were equipped with cannons, which gave the navy the power to dominate the seas. Thanks to the use of these ships, the Ottomans were able to conquer many Mediterranean islands, including Cyprus, Rhodes and Crete. But perhaps even greater than the Ottomans' wealth and power was their tolerance and respect for other cultures. Due to their diverse population, the Ottomans encouraged interfaith dialogue. People of all faiths were free to practice their religion, and none were persecuted for their beliefs. Even non-Muslims had rights and were allowed to participate in government affairs if they so chose. This cosmopolitan environment allowed scientific and cultural ideas to flourish. For example, the astronomer Taqi al-Din, who was a Muslim convert from Christianity, produced one of the best star tables of his age. Another example was the polymath Khatib Kalebi, who collected and translated ancient Greek texts into Arabic. Through the efforts of men like Khatib and the Ottomans' general tolerance, a huge library of scientific knowledge was preserved and made available to Western scholars. In fact, the Ottomans were so well connected to Europe that many Western merchants and scientists traveled east through their lands to trade and study. One of these was Leonardo da Vinci, who visited Istanbul in 1514. The traveler who did the most to publicize the wonders of the East was the German ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, von Otter, who traveled through the entire realm from Istanbul to Damascus and even into the Arabian Desert. In the early 1600s, however, things began to unravel. Corruption spread throughout the empire. Military leaders and provincial governors abused their power. The sultans became more isolated, and the grand viziers gained more power. Then came the Battle of Karansibes in 1697. The Ottomans were defeated by the Holy League, a coalition of European powers led by the Habsburgs. Though victorious, the Europeans were unable to capitalize on their victory, and the Ottomans recovered. But a much greater disaster struck in 1718. The Russian Tsar Peter the Great defeated the Ottomans at the Battle of Stanilkovci. Soon after, the Russians seized control of the Crimean Peninsula. Over the next century, the Ottomans lost almost all of their territories outside of Anatolia. Then in the early 1800s, a series of uprisings swept across the empire, weakening it even further. In 1821, Greece won its independence, and in 1876, the Russians liberated Serbia. But in reality, the Ottoman Empire would live on for another 45 years, thanks in part to the efforts of British and French diplomats who pressured the Europeans to leave them alone. Nevertheless, the empire had been reduced to Anatolia and the Arab world. But in 1913, internal conflict erupted. The Arabs revolted in order to gain independence, and with their help, the British and French invaded. The First World War soon broke out, and the sick man of Europe joined the Central Powers. The Ottomans made some initial gains in the Middle East, but eventually the British and their allies invaded again. They marched across the empire, taking one city after another. On October 1, 1919, the Greeks invaded Anatolia, hoping to conquer it. But a Turkish nationalist named Mustafa Kemal Ataturk fought them back and drove them out. Once the war was over, he turned on the remaining Ottomans, and in 1922, the last Sultan, Mehmed VI, was forced to abdicate. The Ottoman Empire was officially finished, and the Republic of Turkey was born under the rule of Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. The legacy of the Ottoman Empire is a rich one. From Budapest to Belfast, from Sarajevo to Stambouli, the Ottomans left behind mosques, madrasas, and monuments that speak to their devotion to Islam and to Allah. Though they forcibly converted millions of people to their faith, they were generally tolerant of other religions. Christians and Jews served in high government positions, and non-Muslims were able to travel freely throughout the empire. Trade flourished and science developed. The Ottomans introduced gunpowder weapons into Europe and helped preserve ancient Greek texts. Even the once mighty Mongols respected them, and many of their customs and traditions can still be seen in Turkey today. They may be gone, but their influence continues. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this one.